We understand we got a problem, we got to deal with it. When the termites eating at the foundation of your house, you don't go, well, dadgummit, I guess we'll let it continue to eat and see what happens. No, you don't. You exterminate the termites.
Gentlemen and ladies, start your engines. It's Sunday in South Carolina, courtesy of Senator Larry Grooms, talking about the man on your screen right there, Treasurer Curtis Loftis, calling for his removal from the Treasurer's office after the issuance of a final report on that $1.8 billion accounting error in the state's finances. Again, we do want to point out the money never really existed, but still a major issue that this state's been looking into for more than a year now. That's where we begin our debate on Connect to the Capitol this week. We've got a lot on the plate, but we're going to begin with just a quick talk about that call for the removal. Catherine Glenn Foster's here, Dave Wilson. That is good old country wisdom right there.
Sure is.
You gotta knock down the house. You can't let the termites take it.
Knock down the house, and that's the point that Larry Grooms was making when he finalized that whole little talk right there, calling for the Senate to remove State Treasurer Curtis Loftis from office for a dereliction of duties. Now, Loftis immediately comes out and says this is not my doing, it was somebody else's responsibility. But there is a move in the Senate right now, which would require a 2/3 vote of the Senate, send it over to the House, a 2/3 vote of the House, and Curtis Loftis could be the first elected official in a constitutional level, which is the statewide offices, to be removed from office if that does happen. So it'll be a very interesting thing to see as that unfolds. I had a conversation earlier in the week with Senator Larry Grooms as part of a Connect to the Capitol Extra, and you can always catch that to see the full conversation that we had, but we'll have a conversation with them a little bit later today.
Worth noting that if they do, in fact, try to get that vote, Treasurer Loftis could be on the floor of the Senate defending himself. He's done so far through the issuance of a statement saying, hey, look, you can come look at my books. Inspector generals can come look at the books. SLED can come look at the books, bring on the investigation. So I think we might see him on the floor of the Senate.
That will be a speaking of what you see when you start watching this show on a Sunday morning,
It'll wake you up.
That will be waking you up on a Sunday morning, that's for sure.
Who needs coffee? Who needs Folgers in your cup? Other money matters. We're talking income taxes. But this will wake you up too. Taxes, not a real fun subject, but when you talk about cutting them, I think we got people's attention. Proposal put forth this week by the governor, the House Speaker Merle Smith, and a lot of lawmakers saying we're going to try to do this.
Exactly. So we had already seen income tax reduction. Now we're looking at a proposal to take that tax rate down to a flat tax of 3.99% across the board. For the Speaker of the House, this really is about South Carolina competitiveness, attracting more businesses into the state and making South Carolina a better place for business and to live.
And he's going to be in here in the studio to talk all about that. Looking forward to that conversation for sure. Tort reform. That's been a long conversation.
That was a 4-week conversation in the
just
Senate.
In the Senate. We've been talking about it for about 12 weeks, but and their debate seemed that long. S-44, a controversial measure. It changed throughout the course of the debate, but now passed by the Senate just a few days ago. We'll see what happens next.
So a couple of weeks ago, we had a conversation with Senator Michael Johnson out of York County here, and an extended Connect to the Capitol segment. In that conversation, he was basically explaining you've got trial lawyers, you've got insurance companies, and you've got victims, and somewhere in the middle is the consumer. And they were trying for 4 weeks to try to figure out how do you rebalance that, because you've got small businesses that have been hurt. One of the major things that they did here was cut the requirement of insurance for bars, restaurants, and VFWs from $1 million down to $500,000, and then also spread out, as Catherine, you've talked about on the show, how do you, instead of putting all the responsibility on one, how do you spread that responsibility out to everybody percentage-wise based upon who was responsible for that? So that's an interesting conversation, but they finally did move forward on that. What happens with it in the House? That's the real question, because they passed a liquor liability bill a couple of weeks ago.
A lot of people seem happy with.
Yeah, and so the question is whether or not the Senate and the House will find some way to continue talking about this, or are we going to be stuck here again for a while?
Something tells me we're going to be stuck. We'll find out. Time will tell. There's still time left on the clock. The game isn't over yet, so we'll see. But other issues this week: education, the money that's been set aside in the House version of the budget, teacher raises, money for safety enhancements. We're going to have Sherry East from the South Carolina Education Association here to talk about some of the priorities her group sees that I think a lot of people might recognize if they have children in the system.
Absolutely. And the governor has been explicit in his calls for education policy reform, for the teacher raises, for your protection for the students and the teachers in schools. We're going to be talking with Sherry about a couple different major topics, including on a Connect to the Capitol Extra, but specifically focusing in on the Education Assistance Act, looking at teacher recruitment, teacher retention, dealing with burnout and classroom resources and support. So looking ahead at how we better support our teachers in the next generation, as well as at some of those businesses coming into South Carolina, what that means for tax abatements and what responsibility those businesses have to give back to the community that they're moving into.
Absolutely. Finally, we're going to roll the dice on the last segment.
Definitely rolling the dice on this last one.
Casino gambling in South Carolina. We know it's not legal.
Right.
But there is already a plan by a private developer to set one up.
There's a private developer.
There's also a plan in the House
Yep.
that could potentially make it happen.
Right. You've got a private developer out of Greenville, South Carolina, who's looking to pour about $1 billion into an area along I-95 and what's called the Corridor of Shame in that particular area to open up opportunity there. But the one hindrance that we have right now is that the only form of legalized gambling in South Carolina is the South Carolina Education Lottery, which is run by the state. And so one of the big arguments that we're going to be hearing, and we hear it from Representative Todd Rutherford in just a little while here on the show, and you can always connect with the Capitol on one of our extras on the website as well. We will have a conversation with him about what does it mean to bring a casino into this area, the number of jobs that could come into the area, and going back to our conversation that we had just a minute ago about reducing taxes, how do you balance reducing people's taxes but also keeping revenue in place that you're going to have? Representative Rutherford has an idea on that one based upon what we could see going on with this casino, which could be right there in Orangeburg County. Yeah,
right there in Orangeburg County. The old Santee outlet malls, they've been vacant for the better part of 2 decades. The plans on this are pretty extravagant.
They really are.
And Representative Todd Rutherford will be in here, sponsor of that bill, too, that could potentially legalize it. We'll have an extra with that as well. So a lot on the table this week. Let's get you connected to the Capitol.
Today is the day that South Carolina takes back their income tax policy from Washington, D.C.
Your money that you make, that you earn, that you have is your money. It belongs to the taxpayers. The government has no claim on it until you make it.
Here comes the money. At least that's the plan that was put forth at the State House just a few days ago. Income tax reform. That's probably music to the ears of a lot of people. More money in your pocket. Catherine, Dave Wilson here to talk about this, and the House Speaker, Merle Smith, who you just saw a moment ago. You talked about taking claim of the tax code, taking it away from Washington, if you want to break that down a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're one of 5 states in the union that start off your tax return at the federal taxable income rather than your adjusted gross income. So what that has done for us in South Carolina is Washington, D.C.'s tax policy is basically adopted by South Carolina. And so what it has created in this state is that 44% of wage earners in South Carolina do not pay any state income taxes. And it's not the lowest, it's all over, it's every category, up to even the people who make $1 million plus a year do not pay any taxes. So what we were trying to do here is to let South Carolina develop their own tax policy. What do we tax, what don't we tax, and what deductions you have and what deductions you are not allowed, and then apply a flat rate, a low rate to our income tax rather than a progressive rate that we have now.
That's fantastic. Can you share why we necessarily need this change and why we need it now, since the state has also just made the maximum tax rate for the state to be 6% ahead of schedule?
Yes, we were at 7%, and now we will be down to 6% at the end of this fiscal year. And so we have reduced taxes about $1 billion of income taxes. And I always give a plug. Over the last 30 years, the General Assembly has reduced taxes by $50 billion. That's how much money we have given back to the taxpayers rather than keeping it in the Treasury. But what came abundantly clear to me is that we're in a competitive nature. The Southeast is the growing hub of economic activity, and all our neighboring states are lowering their tax rates. In fact, we have the highest tax rate, even when we get to 6%, in the entire Southeast. So it's a competitiveness issue, and I've really seen it when we are out on economic development trips and looking to locate headquarters where the highest paid employees would come and live and work and pay taxes in South Carolina. And when they look and see you're the highest in the Southeast, that's a competitive disadvantage with our neighboring states. And those are the ones that we're generally competing with in economic projects these days.
So, Mr. Speaker, how in the world do we go from a system where we're now down at 6%? We had a $14.6 billion budget. How do you make those numbers work?
Well, again, in every tax reform package, there are winners and losers. There's the people who are going to pay less taxes in this, and there are going to be people who are going to pay a little more. It's not going to be a tremendous amount, but that's what happens in every tax reform. So we are again going to apply $200+ million a year to reduce our income tax, when that's a bigger rate than we have done in years past. And we're going to take that flip to the adjusted gross income, which are going and lower the rate, which are going to broaden the base, which more people are going to have to pay income taxes. And everybody should pay something in income taxes because everybody uses government at some level. But the beauty of a flat rate and a lower rate is that the people at the lower end of the income will pay less in taxes, and the people on the upper end will pay more in taxes. And that's the fair thing now, rather than having a progressive rate and already letting the federal government pick winners and losers for us. South Carolina will make those decisions now.
We have a graphic with some of the bullet points of how this would work. Marcus, if you could show that, some of the facts of how that we've touched upon already about how this would be laid out. That flat tax you're talking about, but progressively lower over time. There is something tied into that hitting the 2.4% rate, though, is there not?
Yes, there is. If a 5% growth, then it's mandatory that we reduce the rate at that time at least by $200 million. And if it's under 5% growth, then that's up to the General Assembly as to whether they will do that.
What are we seeing then with growth? Are we seeing that type of growth happening in the state right now? Is this projected to be a reality with what we're seeing? It
is. I mean, everything's dependent upon the economy, and you can never predict the economy. But the one thing that's going for South Carolina is per capita, we have been the fastest growing state over the past 3 years. Commensurate with that, people have brought their money here, and we've had more wealthy individuals. But more importantly, we brought more businesses and created more jobs and created a bigger tax base. And so, way things are going now, the beauty of this whole proposal is that you've seen Mississippi and you've seen Louisiana both reduce their income tax and to some degree have a long-term goal to bring it to zero, but they have switched taxes. They have imposed additional sales tax or property tax. Here we're not doing that. We're just broadening the base, flattening the rate, and then going to control the growth by giving the money back to the taxpayers and reduce the rate. And so at that point, I think someone has said, I saw in an article, is that if we pass this going to 399, we will be the lowest rate in the Southeast, in fact, in the nation that has an state income tax. But also, if we bring it down to 2.49, that also will be the lowest. North Carolina's got a goal of bringing it to 2.5%, so we want to stay a little bit less than North Carolina.
Incredible. And so this really for you is about growth and about South Carolinians.
It's about growth and it's about competitiveness. And I think we've got to remain competitive because everyone's out recruiting jobs. Our neighbors are recruiting jobs in industry. And you see President Trump right now is trying to bring industry back into America. That's the purpose of his tariffs. And South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, all of us are prime areas for locating high-tech, new industry in this country. And I want to make sure that we have a competitive edge on our neighbors in that regard.
We'll have more of a conversation with Speaker Merle Smith on a Connect to the Capitol Extra, so make sure that you check that out at WACH.com. Mr. Speaker, thanks so much for being a part of this today.
Thank you for having me. Enjoyed it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, we're talking school funding this week on Connect to the Capitol. We have gone into great depth talking about the state budget process as the House finished up their very extended debate on that. We won't need to get any further into that, at least at the moment. We want to keep our focus on school funding in public education here in South Carolina. So critical, Catherine, that we make sure that our next generation gets the proper resources that they need. A focus this year, as it has been in past years, put on increasing teacher pay, school security and safety. And who better to talk about so many of those issues than friend of this program and friend of all programs here at WACH Fox, Sherry East from the South Carolina Education Association. Such a powerful voice for education. Let's talk about some of those budget priorities that you saw play out, at least in the House, because it hasn't happened in the Senate yet.
Right. Well, the thing that we're most excited about is the $1,500 pay raise for teachers.
Yeah.
So we saw the $1,500 make it out of the House. Like I said, it's sitting in the Senate, and so we'll see what happens there. We are concerned. We're hearing that there may be an increase in insurance, though. So we don't want that to swap one for the other. We don't want that to take anything away from the $1,500. We would also like to see some improvements in support staff. You know, we focus a lot on the teacher pay part of it, but a school can't operate without everybody. The bus drivers, the secretaries, the teachers' aides, all play an integral part in that too. So we would hope, as we're putting forth the budget and money in South Carolina, that we would also support the other folks in the schools, not in place of the teachers,
Sure.
but in addition to teacher pay raises. We like to see some more money put in for the support staff part of schools.
What about the school resource officers element of that? In the House, they didn't get all the money they wanted, but it's
Right.
it's an important thing.
Absolutely, and we've seen that over the years with the school safety issues that went on. And you know, Governor McMaster's been on that for a while now, that we want a school resource officer in every school. Yep. And we know we had it in the high schools, but sometimes our high schools are so large, you may need more than one SRO per school, especially if you have a building of 5. Like one of the schools I taught in, there were 5 different parts of a building. You could have at least used a couple of resource officers. And we do have some legislation right now to let school districts that have more than 15,000 students, they are going to be able to hire some private security to come in and supplement the SRO, not in place of, but to supplement where they see some ways that they can get more school coverage that way using some private security.
It is all about protecting our students. Now here at Connect to the Capitol, we've also been closely following the Education Assistance Act. And it was introduced to address things like teacher recruitment, retention, burnout, classroom support. How do you feel about that? Is this enough? Is it going far enough? And what are the real issues behind the issues that we've seen with teacher recruitment and retention?
Well, I want to remind people we still do have a teacher shortage in South Carolina, even though it leveled out this year as far as we didn't see as many leave as we have in past years. That we love the Teacher Education Appreciation Act. Actually, it was named something else last year and didn't get anywhere. But this year it has made it over to the Senate. We are hoping that the Senate would hear it. It was actually on their agenda this week, but they didn't get to it, or for whatever reason they didn't choose to take it up. It does go a long way in with the breach of contracts. If a teacher is trying to get out of their contract because of a family issue, that the state board does not have to take your certificate for a year now. It can be a lesser penalty of 6 months or not at all. Like they can choose not to do that. So that's helpful. There's some things in there around your certificate, also your teaching certificate. Teachers have a lot of burdensome paperwork that we deal with. So every 5 years you have to recertify. So this would remove that, and so it would give you almost like a permanent licensure after so many years, then you would not have to re-up, or the district professional development that's already in place, it would cover what you need to recertify. So that is helpful. It's got a sick leave bank, a universal sick leave bank, or that every district would have to have their own sick leave bank. And right now, a lot of people don't realize that some districts don't have one. So those are things that we find helpful in this bill. So we do hope that it goes across and gets approved and makes it to the governor's desk. However, I don't think it's enough. It's a step in the right direction, but there are a lot of other issues that we heard. We saw them tackle the unencumbered time. Teachers, remember when I was on your show, couldn't go to the bathroom. So they're supposed to get this 30 minutes break every day to take care of personal things. So we're hearing more about your time too. They're keeping teachers too late after school for professional development, or you have to go in early, or they just can't get their job done. So we're still hearing the time issues, and we're also hearing a lot about discipline issues. So those are some more things. So is it a step in the right direction? Absolutely. Is it going to fix everything? No. But again, it's bringing awareness to the facts, and hopefully we can get some results out of it.
Absolutely. We've talked about this in the past. We've barely touched it on this show, but we have brought it up. Tax abatements in the state of South Carolina for major corporations. Of course we want the business. Of course we want the jobs. But a lot of these abatements filter down and have an effect on local school districts. They miss out on some money to the tune of billions.
Billions. And actually the Good Jobs First people came to us with that statistic saying you are the worst in the nation in giving away tax abatement money to companies to come into South Carolina. And like you said, we want those businesses. We see the importance of attracting businesses into South Carolina, but we also see the funding loss that's happening. That report spells it out. It's an eye-opener. It is right in front of your face, $3 billion in the past, since 2017, that we've lost. So for poor districts like Chester County, I can speak to that one, I think it's $118 million that they've lost. And what could that purchase in Chester County? You talked about SROs, you talked about school nurses. They desperately need a new school. Chester High School needs to be rebuilt. They also have never had a track and field that they can run a track meet on. So those kind of things are real issues, real funding disparities and we get it. Bring in the businesses, but our answer to that, or our ask, is hold the school districts harmless in these deals. Make them pay their taxes to the school districts, or even half. Make them pay 50% of their taxes to the school districts. The other thing we found is that school districts aren't aware. Like, they're not even aware these deals have went on or what they've lost out on. So we want somebody from a school district or school personnel involved in the deal. So invite us to the table. Let us talk about the needs that the school district has and how we can work together. And the other thing is, we noticed is not only it's just a move-in, like, oh, we're going to give you a break for coming to South Carolina. We're giving you a break to live here forever. I think Volvo has a 40-year deal. Like, that's not an incentive to move here. That's an incentive to never pay taxes here. So in this era of tax reform, we don't want to pay our tax. We want, no state tax, income tax. How are you going to fund your goods and services in South Carolina? So, and these companies, the other eye-opener was I looked up their profit margins. Like, okay, are these struggling companies that, they need a break to set up shop here? They're not. They are making billions of dollars in profit. After their operating procedures, they're still raking in billions of dollars in profit. These are not companies that need the tax breaks. These are companies that can afford to pay for a school to be built. They can afford to buy a school nurse. They can afford to help fund the communities where they're living. They say they want to help grow these communities, and these companies are going to be the reason people move and live there. Well, then prove it. Prove it with what you budget, or prove it with what you're going to pay to your local school district by living in that district. So we really hope that we can get some bipartisan support for a tax abatement reform.
We definitely want these companies to move to South Carolina, but also not at the expense of the next generation, our state students. Let's take a step back to the macro level and talk about what's going on up at the federal level. We're seeing threats of cuts to different programs, education funding programs, and even talk of starting to dismantle the Federal Department of Education. Is there any risk of a trickle-down effect to South Carolina education and students?
Well, that is the golden question of the past 2 weeks. What is going to happen to our schools? What are going to happen to my students? What's going to happen to my after-school care? So we have been fielding a lot of calls, especially from schools that are Title I. Title I is your poverty index for schools. So there's lots of title monies that flow into South Carolina. So we're all very nervous right now about what's going on in D.C. because there are still laws that apply to special needs families, disability, your title monies, and all of that. So, I mean, in theory, all the money's going to just leave D.C. and end up in Columbia, and Columbia's going to divvy it out where it's supposed to go. That's where we get a little nervous. Are we set up for that? Are we ready for that? You know, can you assure Williamsburg County that they're still going to get the 10% that they get from the feds because of their IDEA and title money? Yet to be seen. You know, I don't know. It is making a lot of people nervous. We hope that we're set up and we hope that we have what's best for children in our radar right now, but a lot of people are very nervous about all the programs. And we've seen some districts right now, because of the DEI initiatives out of DC, one district was told, oh, I think it was Lawrence County, you've lost $10 million in funding for a grant because it had DEI language in it. We have a program at USC in Carolina that's putting 15 support staff in the pathway to become teachers. They were told to cease their program right now. Like, all funding for those potential teachers is gone. They're in the middle of appealing that. So I think there are those things that are going on out there that people aren't aware of, that it is the trickle-down effect from what's happening in Washington to what's going to happen in your school.
All right, a lot to talk about for sure, and we're going to do that. We're going to have a Connect to the Capitol extra segment. Catherine and Sherry will be doing that. You can always find that on our website, wach.com. All right, that right there could be ruins to riches. What you're looking at there, the old Santee Outlet Malls, Orangeburg County. A development company owns that property. They want to make it a casino. Of course, state law would have to change a little bit to cash in on that.
Just a bit, yes.
Yes,
we don't actually allow that in South Carolina.
But there is a proposal on the table at the State House that could do that. Right now, it'd be in the House. So.
And joining us right now, the minority leader, Todd Rutherford, here from Richland County. Representative, there have been a lot of times in South Carolina history where there have been promises made to what was called the Corridor of Shame, that was inaptly put that way more than 20 years ago in a documentary. Why in the world would we be looking to put a casino in this area, and what does it mean economically for an area like Orangeburg and that whole region?
Well, the short answer is it means money and it means jobs. And when you have a corridor like you just saw on the television, where you can clearly see this blight and no rush right now to do anything about it, and here we have an answer. And it is taking the Tier 4 counties, those counties at the lowest ends of our economic spectrum, and those counties that are along the I-95 corridor. So you're focusing in on a particular area that has been particularly hard hit, and saying, hey, here's the opportunity. And that opportunity is going to be casino gaming. And so if the state, we talked about earlier this week, cutting our tax income, cutting our income taxes, and if we're going to do that, we know we're going to lose income. This is a way to supplant that income. In fact, this is not only a perfect way to supplant that income with about $75 million to the state, it also, in that area, those Tier 4 counties right there in that area, about 4,500 jobs annually. It's a no-lose scenario and something the state has got to do.
And yet we have a group of folks who have definitely decided they're going to come out against this because they're against every form of gambling, with the exception of what is now the state lottery, which is the state-sponsored gambling in South Carolina.
Yeah, I don't understand the logic that suggests that the only industry, the only people that should be in the gaming industry in South Carolina should be the government. I don't understand that logic, and in fact, there is no logic to that. And in fact, what we can do right now is look at something like gaming, bringing gaming in. South Carolina is one of the most beautiful places in the world, and every time people come here, they say that. So to provide someplace else for them to come that is an area where right now nobody's really going, to fix up a mall, to turn it into a casino, to me is beyond a no-brainer. It's a revenue gainer. Yeah. And when you can do something like that, when you look at sports betting, look at all the things we can do, horse betting, all the things that we have in South Carolina that people can take advantage of, and that the state can get money from without digging into the taxpayer's pocket, we have to look into it.
Yeah, like you said, there will be the expected pockets of opposition that come to this, but the polling you and I were discussing before this segment, 68% of people support this.
That's right.
So overall, public perception of gambling is shifting in South Carolina.
It has shifted, and it has gotten to the point where, again, and this is the biggest point, it's freedom. If you don't want to do it, don't do it.
Correct.
If you don't want to pick up your phone and do sports betting, don't do it. And if you don't want to go to a casino, then don't go. But those people that do, and especially those people going up and down I-95, coming down 26, that don't even live in South Carolina, to be able to capture their money and not South Carolina taxpayer money, that is a blessing, and that's something that we need to jump on.
So when we take a look at a bill moving forward on here, you've got a lot of support on this bill because you've got several key folks within House Ways and Means. You've got other folks like yourself who are behind this. How fast do you see something like this being able to move through the House? Because we know that it has to go to the Senate, which is a completely different beast.
Well, my answers are going to be not fast enough. This is a bipartisan bill, and this is something that you see support for in the House and in the Senate. This is something you see support for. It doesn't matter the geography, where people live. Of course, the greatest opposition is going to come from the upstate, but everybody else that looks at the numbers says this is a good idea and the state needs to get on it, and we need to get on it right now.
Okay.
Good stuff. Well, we're going to have a much more extended conversation about this in our Connect to the Capitol Extra. You can see that at WACH.com. Thank you very much, Representative Rutherford, joining us.
Thank you all for having me.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
All right, if that didn't get your attention, that was a lot. We packed a lot in.
It's been a busy Sunday.
It has been a busy Sunday. Gets everyone ready for the yard work now. That's the next step. Next steps at the State House this week. There's one thing we're looking at. Energy, utilities, making sure people can keep the lights on, not only today, but 10 years from now, 20 years from now. Do we have the setup to generate enough power? That's what's at stake.
South Carolina Senate is taking up the energy bill that came over from the House. They'll start taking that up and having that discussion starting on Wednesday. I feel we may be having deja vu when it comes to that, like we had with tort reform and everything else, because it's a big issue in South Carolina. We've got millions of people who are making this their home, and we're expecting over the next 20 years to see another 1 million people come into South Carolina. With that, along with the businesses that are coming in, we've got to have a plan right now to handle a grid, and how do we increase power production so that we can meet all those needs.
Yeah, there's a lot to do, and that was going to take a while.
Let's
hope not 4 weeks, because the clock might have run out.
And they still also have to take care of the budget. Right.
That has to get done.
Right.
That's required by law.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we're required to wrap things up right about now. So, Catherine, Dave, thank you again for another great week. A lot of good information for everyone watching. We're glad we could get you connected to the Capitol this Sunday in South Carolina. See you next week.
Have a good week.
Bye.